7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Hey guys, and welcome to another show. As I said last week, we've got a new co-host. For those who haven't watched that show, that's Deetz right next to me. Something that we wanted to discuss. So in this week, it was on Thursday, we had a vaping conference in Sandton here in South Africa. And, this was hosted by the VPA. And all the information in this conference was because just becoming more visible around what the response will be to the bill that's out now for public comment. And I just wanted to discuss one of the sections in that conference, which is the study that was done by Canback Consult and presented to us by Arshad Abbas. And there's a great deal of information both locally and a lot of data was also collected globally. So, this is going to be interesting for people here in South Africa, of course, but also interesting for people in global markets, to look at other markets in comparison. So I'm just quickly going to show some of these slides. Just want to share my screen. Cool, can you all see my screen? Brilliant. Okay, so the whole reason why this study and market research was done was to respond, of course, adequately to the regulation bill that's out for public comment. But the vaping is a phenomenon and pretty much what you can call a market disruptor. It doesn't really fit into an exact category, right? Or any existing category. So this will make regulators really uncomfortable. So I'm just going to go to the first slide over here. This is page 3. Okay, so yeah, this study is to show where the market is headed. Remember, any regulatory changes made will have an impact on where the market is going. Okay, so if we look at this slide here, EVP, which I think is a term for electronic vaping products, right? As a category, has continued to grow, with the largest markets being in the US and the UK. South Africa is at its early stage of development. EVPs continue to take share from the formal smoking, all developed markets where it is present, okay? And so you're looking at total EVP revenue, and you can see how small we are, South Africa, in comparison to some of the more mature markets out there. So that really gives you an idea of, if we look at global market share, who are the biggest players. And United Kingdom, of course, and United States, and Germany, being the top 3. I had no clue that Germany, Italy, and France was, that big. I had literally no clue, because the most information that I'm seeing come out is from information coming from either the UK or United States. Did you guys find anything interesting on the slide?
Two things mainly. For me, quite interesting that we're above Belgium and Ireland. Not really that interesting that we're above Australia, because of course they're clamping down very hard on it, but we're more than double the size of the Aussie market. But what really struck me was the size of the Egyptian market. I mean, we're about 3/4 the size of the market in Egypt. I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought the Egyptian market would have been smaller than ours. So that was quite interesting. And then also the fact that after the big five of the US, UK, Germany, Italy, France, Poland is the next one. So I guess having Inawera as your home base kind of has its benefits there. And Russia as well, massive, 332 million US dollars. So they're about nearly 4 times the size of the South African market, which again, okay, Russia's a big place, but one doesn't really think of them as being right up there in terms of vapors. So quite interesting. And then also Malaysia, with a bigger market than South Africa. Now, I thought Malaysia had cracked down quite heavily on smoking generally and on e-cigarettes as well, on vaping as well. So interesting to see Malaysia up there, sort of nearly the same size as the Egyptian market.
Yeah, I kind of didn't even look at that, Richard, now that you pointed out that Egypt is a bigger market than South Africa. How's that possible, So Egypt, in fact, then, right, is the leading market in Africa.
Yes.
Which is, wow, okay.
Quite surprising to see Indonesia up there as well. I mean, I know they make quite a lot of hardware there, but to see them up, just behind the EU and Russia, and above places like Greece, Switzerland, Netherlands, Spain, Ukraine, Belgium, Ireland, quite interesting. The place where it doesn't seem to have taken it off at all is on the subcontinent. I mean, we've got Pakistan down at $6 million total market. India, it's been banned in quite a lot of states, so I would imagine they don't really have a formal, legit market there. But places like Sri Lanka as well, it doesn't seem to have taken off at all there.
Yeah, New Zealand also not on here, I mean, it's a small island, you know what I mean? But I guess when they looked at this EVP revenue, that they obviously look at it in conjunction with, the total amount of population. I'm not sure exactly how this was calculated, but if, South Africa will always be a smaller market than United States and United Kingdom, right? Because there's more, how many million people is in the United States? Like 300 million?
Yeah, about 325 million.
Yeah, so it will always be bigger. So I'm not 100%. Yeah?
I think the biggest probably per capita is the UK. Because they're just over 1/3 the size of the US market, but their population certainly isn't 1/3 the size of the US population. So probably the biggest take-up per capita has probably been in the UK. I mean, their market's 3 times the size of Germany's, and their population, I think, is slightly smaller still. So that's just an indication of how, and I suppose an indication of how much it helps to have public health bodies actually endorse it. Britain has been at the forefront of public health bodies urging smokers to move across to vaping, and we can see the results here. Their per capita take-up exceeds anybody, really.
Yeah, exactly that, right? This is the golden thread through this whole thing. It's well put together. So shall we move over to the next slide?
Yeah, let's have a look.
Okay, so this slide over here, sorry, I'm having little mouse problems here. On a value basis, the SA market has grown at about 5% annually, with EVP growing at 10.3%. On a volume basis, formal tobacco products have declined. With a recent IPOS study showing growth in the illicit segment as an important factor for this decline. So some of the comments that I had here, that this was quite a clever slide. I really enjoyed this one. So it shows that the vaping market has grown by 10% over the last 10 years, but the slide also shows that the local combustible tobacco market has shrunk by 5%, and then it breaks the idea that vaping is shrinking another market by saying all the illegal, or because of the cigarette or the combustible tobacco market being so heavily regulated, it's created a underground market, right? And it's huge. I think Carte Blanche had a story about it. I didn't watch it, but I've been reading a little bit about this in the news and so forth. But there's cigarettes coming into South Africa from neighboring countries, right? And some of these packs of cigarettes are being sold for R5. R5 is like a third of $1, right? On the black market, and this makes cigarettes extremely accessible, even for people living in poverty. Okay, so tobacco is extremely accessible, and it's not only accessible to us; it's accessible to people living in poverty as well. So yeah, I like this slide a lot.
Just something to mention on the tobacco, the whole underground ring or type of industry from tobacco. It's in the industry that I work in. It's a very big or very sought after commodity. It's one of the easiest things to sell once it's stolen. So people actually steal truckloads at a time. Like some of my clients and a lot of the people I've worked with at the border posts around in Africa and South Africa, they steal a truck for the cigarettes. So they'll just steal the truck, offload the cigarettes, and then abandon the truck wherever. Because it's untraceable, it's easy. It's a commodity everyone wants. It's not easy to trace, even if it's a stolen item. So over the past few years, it's grown to, I would say, almost the size of, or as big an issue as antiretroviral drugs was at some point, being stolen and sold again. Still being done somewhere, but cigarettes is it's opened up a very big black market trade because of its value. Even once stolen, you can still sell it at normal prices and all of that. So with vaping rising and smoking going down, it's also better. I mean, vaping is more regulated, obviously, so it's already a step ahead from a change from that.
What I'd like to know is how much vapor sales are hurting cigarette sales, globally, even in the big markets in the US and UK and so on. Because recently there's been a number of articles on sites like Vaping 360 where they talk about declining tobacco volumes and the problems that the tobacco bonds in the US are now facing due to lower sales volumes and so on. And you read the vaping press and you get the impression that it's like 80% of the problem is due to vaping sales taking market share away from tobacco. But then you read like Bloomberg, Forbes, Fortune, the economic sector media that look into the tobacco bonds and that advise investors on the viability of tobacco bonds and so on. And they barely mention vaping at all. For them, the big thing has been the raising of the smoking age limit to 21 in certain states in the US. California is one of them. Another big thing is extra excise duties. California recently slapped up $2 extra excise on each pack of cigarettes. And, the big financial media outlets tend to look more at the traditional sort of things that tend to hit cigarette sales a lot. So we're getting two different stories, one from the vaping media that vaping's killing smoking, and the other from the financial media that it's regulation and tax that's killing smoking. So I'd like to just know where the balance is there. I mean, obviously everything's having an effect, but to just get a sense of where the balance is, how much of it is actually due to vaping.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's why I'm so happy that he brought this, dimension into the slide because, because you need to take into consideration that vaping is not the the biggest contributor here, and that's what he wants to make visible in these slides. And this is going to speak volumes. I think this slide is really important one. Shall we move over to the next slide? This slide here, right? This is the important one, for every investor or any person that wants to start up a vaping company or a juice line or whatever. You want to know what's the forecast. You want to know, how big is the market now and how big will the market become? Is there still space for me to exist within that market? All right. And I didn't think that they are going to do a forecast like this. So this is very valuable information for everybody that's a supplier and a retailer out there, and even people that want to invest into our market globally, right? This will give you a very good idea of what our market is looking like and if it's worth doing that or not. But what this is saying, so where's vaping going? The vaping market is at the moment estimated at 1.16 billion, right here, billion rand here in South Africa. On this slide, it shows that that we expect to see a 12.3% growth over the next 10 years. And what does that really mean? But, of course, if we look at this growth that they estimate on that 12.3%, that's considering that there's nothing standing in its way. Okay, so we need to be super careful here on what we put in place from a regulation or from a compliance perspective, that we don't stunt the growth of this industry, because if we do it the correct way, we could see a 12.3% increase in this market sector over the next 10 years. And what that means is that in 2027, they estimate this market to be a 3.3 billion in total, right? Big market. That's pretty much tripling in size. So did you guys have any comments on this slide? It's pretty straightforward, but I had no clue of what the numbers were here, of how big the market was and where it could be going. But I mean, if you consider, how many shops we're seeing now, and you consider that's 1.16 billion, and you triple that, you're pretty much going to see a vaping store in every single square, in every single shopping market, even in retail. So convenience stores, supermarkets, you'll see products there. So that to me is kind of where the market is going. Deetz, looked like you wanted to say something. Deetz, it looked like you wanted to say something. Your daughter came in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
Basically what I wanted to say was I was very surprised with the figures if this is how it is currently going. I actually thought quite the opposite because the market was so saturated. I was up in Gauteng up until about February. And from what I could see, the market there was very tight to get in because of how saturated already it was. There's a lot of people in the market. I mean, looking at Gauteng where I was, there was a vape shop. I could say possibly every 5 kilometers there was a vape shop somewhere. Some places even closer. And here in Cape Town, it's not different. There's a lot of vape shops here. Not a lot I would go to, but there's many of them here. So I thought it was very saturated, and at this point it kind of hit that point where there's not many more unless you innovate. And I mean, we've seen innovation also slow down with vaping a little bit. So this is very surprising to me to see the figures, considering this is if it goes the way everyone hopes it to go, like it is currently going.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no clue of what the numbers were. But I definitely didn't think that we're looking at tripling our figures.
I'd be interested to know if they've factored cultural acceptance into this growth pattern. Because my take on it at the moment is that vaping has had sharp uptake among whites, Indians, Muslims, not that high among black smokers. So it would just be interesting to know if that factored into their thinking at all, whether they see greater numbers of black smokers moving across, or whether they see the market still being primarily the sort of white, Indian, Muslim sector of the market. They don't give any indication of that, and I suppose they wouldn't. It's probably not politically expedient in this day and age, but it's nevertheless, it's a factor that must be mentioned.
Yeah, they actually did mention, there is a slide that kind of covers that, the accessibility, and the accessibility most definitely here, and I'll show the slide a little bit later, where it talks about accessibility, but the way it stands right now, it's not that accessible. I mean, even if you consider, if you compare it to smoking, and people are selling singles and loose straw, which is illegal, but the spaza shops, and for the international people that are listening to the show, a spaza shop is a small little shop that sells one or two cold drinks. It's not even an actual physical brick and mortar shop. It's somebody that just has a table in front of them with like chips, cigarettes that you can buy, one loose straw from, a couple of bubble gums, and some cookies and some fried bread maybe. And these shops are extremely not extremely, it's just all over the show, especially in informal settlements. And this is where the people buy, just their small little necessities that they have. So, you're never going to be able to compete at that level. So cigarettes will always, combustible tobacco will always be way more accessible. They even talk about it, but we are going to see some change there as the market matures. So I'm going to move over to the next slide. Okay. And the next section is covering consumer characteristics. Okay. And my comments here was, so this slide gives us a lot of information. I think the biggest point to take out of the slide is that only 0.1% of vapers are never smokers. So what you can see here is you see on the slide, you see cigarette smokers, ex-smokers, and never smoked, right? And then you see the question here, tried EVP, former EVP user, and current EVP user, right? And if you look at the current EVP user, you can see that only 0.1% here were never smokers. So what this slide is making visible here is that this market is not necessarily targeting everybody in the market. And if it's targeting everybody in the market, it's doing a really bad job at doing that, because only 0.1% of people using or vaping is actually never smokers. Did you guys find anything here?
These figures don't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, we look at that first column, percentage EVP usage. We've got tried EVP, 17.5%, former EVP user, 12.5%, and current EVP user, 4.5%. Now, that tells me that there are 3 times as many former EVP users as current EVP users. Are they saying that 3/4 of people who've tried vaping have quit?
Yeah, pretty much. So, so a person that has tried vaping might have quit or might still be smoking.
Okay, so it's 3 out of every 4 either quit entirely or go back to smoking.
Yeah, the statistics go. I mean, that quick little calculation that you did there is actually not that far off, Richard, because now what the statistics are is 50% of people that try vaping convert. And, that is why I'm calling this a phenomenon, because those kind of statistics are unfounded. Unprecedented, yeah. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, just on this slide, I didn't really do as much math on it as you guys did. But what I could clearly see from it, as mentioned, is the current EVP users. It's interesting that the never smoked part of it is 0.01%. This is just thinking of all the other recent news coverage on the Juul and how electronic cigarettes are getting people who never smoked addicted to cigarettes. Not to cigarettes, to EVPs. So that 0.1% is quite interesting in light of the current idea of what's going around media and how people who never smoked are getting addicted to nicotine devices. So that's just something to mention. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to move over to the next slide here. Okay, so this is across current and ex-cigarette smokers. The main driver of EVP consumption is a percentage that vaping is a healthy alternative to smoking and can be an aid to quit cigarettes. All right, my comments here is, I hope I actually wanted them to add another dimension here to this table to see what vapers think of what vaping really is. So this is really interesting, so you can see the questions here on the left. So you see a cigarette smoker and you see an ex-smoker, but you're not seeing a current vapor or a current EVP user, right? And but a cigarette smoker, what they think here. So 17%, right, of current smokers think it's a harm reduction product. Ex-smokers, of course, they don't smoke anymore. Now, I don't know if vaping is classed as ex-smoker, right? Or if an ex-smoker here is somebody that has completely quit, right? But it certainly, in my mind, because of that figure, what I'm thinking here is that an ex-smoker is somebody that doesn't vape or doesn't smoke, okay? But the ex-smoker here, they believe, 36% of them believe that that vaping is less harmful than cigarettes, which is quite high, That needs to change, of course. And then another thing I found on here is nobody understood here, a smoker or an ex-smoker, nobody really thought that this was a novelty thing, like a hobby, as well. Very, very low numbers. Of course, if they had a vaping dimension over here, this novelty would be much higher because of the hobbyist kind of nature of vaping, right? I believe if they had another dimension here, it would show people think this is novelty, right? Did you guys find anything else here?
I think it's quite important that flavors seem to be more important to smokers than they are to ex-smokers. We've got 5.2% of smokers are citing the range of different flavors available, presumably as a means to switch, but only 1.4% of ex-smokers. So I'm not sure what conclusion to draw from that, whether vapers just get used to the flavors and it's no longer such a big deal for them, but quite interesting that it's nearly 4 times the importance of flavors is nearly 4 times as important among smokers as among ex-smokers.
Yeah, I didn't even look at that. That's almost another clue there that vaping wasn't part of ex-smoker, because I think if it was categorized as as being an ex-smoker, then surely that number will be higher, right? If vapers is classed as ex-smoker. Hey, I'm going to move over to the next slide. Okay, so this next slide over here, this talks about the vaping market as it stands at the moment. Okay, the traditional stores in the main retail channel, EVP sales in traditional retail is concentrated in specialist stores, and its growth will be directly impacted by SMEs. So this slide tells us about the majority sales that happen in specialist stores. These stores can be virtual online stores also. So vaping is largely SME, so small to medium enterprise. So any impact on growth, on the sector, so i.e. regulation, may have a direct impact on SMEs. And, so this slide is power. I hope they make this extremely visible to all the influencers before the bill gets to Parliament. Did you guys see anything on here that I didn't?
I can't really. Is this the vaping industry sales, or is this TWISP sales?
They just say here 4 EVPs, so it's the whole.
I'm struggling to believe that 98% of mods are sold in stores, or 98% of juice, 98% of coils.
Well, I agree with the mods, and especially if it's people who are permanently vaping, because if you're permanently vaping, you know what you want, you know your coils, you know the mods and so on. But with the juice, I can see why it would be most retail based, especially if you look at the market of people vaping. Not all of them, but a big majority of the people vaping, well, at least here in Cape Town, is it's young people. And if you go to these vape shops, it's always packed everywhere. I think for juice specifically, it's easier for me personally to go to a shop because I've already bought enough stuff that I had to throw away. So juice specifically, it's easier to go to a shop and taste it or try it before you buy it. So that could be justifiable. But for the most part, if you're looking at vape gear, I also don't agree with these numbers, because I would say 80%, 85% of what I've bought in my vape collection is all online, from online stores. So I'm also not sure if I understand these numbers or the study correct.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if, say, Vape King and the Sirs and the various other hardware stores, their online sales together are only representing 2.3% of the SA vape market. That just doesn't make it. Would make sense for something like TWISP, because they sell mostly at kiosks. Mm-hmm. But if we look at the broader vaping market, the mods and tanks and the 18650s and stuff, is it possible that 97.7% of mods are sold retail and not online? That just doesn't make sense at all to me.
I also agree.
But again, we also have to understand that we're part of the enthusiast vaping sector, which is, we always overplay our importance. I mean, the vaping stats from the US is that the majority of vapers are dual users. They're people who smoke and vape. Now, I know very few vapers who are still smoking. There are a couple, but the vast majority of vapers that I know only vape now. But as we've seen from the stats, the vapers we know don't necessarily, we don't necessarily have an accurate snapshot of what the vaping industry is doing. I mean, these figures may well be correct, but it would be a major surprise to me if they are. I mean, my understanding of the vape industry in South Africa is that apart obviously from Twist with their kiosks, but the actual, the mainstream enthusiast vaping sector a lot of it is online.
Yeah, exactly. This also became quite visible for me throughout this whole presentation, is how little I know, because we'll go on to the further slides, which will now show where South Africa is currently in the market in comparison to some of the other countries. And, that was just an indication for how little I know, because I thought we were much bigger than what the stats is showing. But absolutely, the majority of vapors are definitely not using mods. They're using these little pen style vapes, twisps. In the US now, Juuls.
What do you mean, these little? This is a vape, okay?
Yeah, I left my pod in the what is it? In another room, so I don't have it with me now. Show it off.
The secret's out. Deetz is a tootle puffer.
Ah, Christina is my nicotine, okay?
Yeah, I didn't want to show my rape whistle, in the podcast. So, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this slide so much, but I want to talk about this one here. Okay, affordability of EVP. So this is kind of what Richard was asking earlier. Okay, South African EVP affordability is below vaping category takeoff point. So what this slide is showing us is, where South Africa is sitting. So what they look at is the average income, the average income per household, and they compare that to the price of, vaping products and how affordable it is. So you can see where it's sitting in South Africa. Okay, and another interesting thing over here is Egypt is sitting way behind us. And we saw that they are a much bigger market than what we are, so there's still a lot of growing to do there. So, if you look at the two slides and you compare them together, what the data is telling me that the Egypt market can be quite big if it wants to be, right? But in South Africa, over here, we are sitting, the SA EVP is below the takeoff points compared to other markets, and growth is expected to accelerate as the category develops. Now, as vaping, becomes more popular, and so we've seen this. I mean, I've seen the prices of gear go down and down and down, and becoming even more affordable to people that want to switch over. I mean, I was buying 20 mils of juice at that point when I just started for 80 Rand for 20 mils, okay? And actually 160 Rand for 20 mils. Now, with 160 Rand, you can buy a lot more. You can buy 30 mils, for 160 Rand. I mean, you might find places that sell 60 mils at about $180, right? So, that the juice prices has gone down, and also the mod prices. We used to pay like 1,200 Rand for mod easily. Now you can buy a whole kit for $800 or $500. You know what I'm saying? So prices are becoming more affordable, and as they do, they will become more accessible. And when they become more accessible, you see that J curve there, that's the acceleration point. So as they become more accessible, that's when the market is going to grow, but it's going to grow very quick. As soon as it becomes more accessible, the market will grow, but it will grow very fast. So what did you guys find in the slide?
If ever I've seen a slide that tells DIY vendors that we need 10 Rand concentrates, this is the one. Take a look at that. We need to pay 50% of what we're paying for concentrates. Then it'll take off. Then we will save the nation. Give us those 300 Rand mods, 150 Rand tanks, 10 Rand concentrates.
Yeah, and I'll convert 5 more people a month if that happens. You know what I mean?
But again, interesting that Egypt has built such a huge market when they have to work 7,000 minutes to buy a device and 20 mils of e-liquid. You know, the UK, they have to work about 100 minutes, 200 minutes to afford it. Yeah, it's an important thing. It's an important stat, that, because it does, you know, that previous slide they talked about vaping being cheaper than smoking. And again, if we look at, you know, twists, maybe it is. But once you start getting into the enthusiast market and guys have got 7, 8, 9 mods, 15 atomizers, they go through, you know, 20 mils of premium e-juice a day, then, yeah, I don't know if it's cheaper than smoking. Look, I vape now for a third of the price that I used to smoke. So it's definitely cheaper for me, but I do everything DIY. Now, how representative am I of the vaping community? I mean, most people don't DIY their own juice. They don't even DIY their own coils. So I suppose if you're having like a pod style device or a pen style device where you're only vaping 2 mils of juice a day, you're getting little cartomizers that are all in one that are quite cheap. I suppose it could be, but you know, then we get to the Rob Fisher end of the spectrum where it's like just a constant stream of courier vans dropping off gear, and that's where the cost savings of vaping go out the window. So yeah, interesting figures those, but it hasn't been my experience, because also I can't just look at what I'm paying for vaping now. I have to look at how much I've spent to get to this point. And even though I'm spending probably 400 Rand less than I did on cigarettes, for the first year of vaping, I was spending 400 Rand more, if not more, you know, than I spent on cigarettes. So I suppose over time it evens out. But also I'm not a pen vapor. You know, when I just started vaping and I had a pen style device, I mean, I was vaping 1 mil of juice a day, a 10 mil bottle of juice, which was about 30 Rand then. That lasted me 10 days. So I suppose it can be very cheap, but you know, the question again, how many people actually vape like that?
Well, I definitely think it can be a cheaper alternative to smoking, depending on how you go about it. That's why I say for vaping, there's 2 things. When you start vaping, you need to, well, actually you won't know, because the hobby only bites once you start making your first juice, or you buy that new nice tank that came out. It definitely becomes a hobby. But I've personally helped people stop smoking with only a twist. So the startup cost might be more than that 2 boxes of cigarettes that they normally used to, but they do definitely understand and even see the cost saving of it. And I'm going to take this twist Q for example, because this is the one thing I've helped 4 people quit smoking in this year so far from. You buy the twist, you get the pods. The pod is, I don't know, let's say $50 if you buy it at Spar, which is expensive. You'll pay 50 Rand a week, considering if you were a smoker of 20 a day. The last person who's still vaping, she's vaping one pod a week. So it's costing her permanently 50 Rand a week compared to the 30 Rand a day. It's definitely cheaper, but if you vape like we do, then it's not that cheap. I currently am at a cheap space again, but a few months back I wanted everything that was new and nice. the hobby part of it. So at some point I had to just say, why did I start vaping? So I got back into my DIY, and still, actually, I've never stopped. It just, I didn't mix as much as I do now. So if I'm doing my own mixes and my own coils and everything, it doesn't cost me anything other than the power to charge my batteries once the juice is made. And even to make the juice, it works out very well compared to smoking, especially if you were smoking as much as what I was. Then just another comment on that, the graph with South Africa's growth. Just something I was wondering about. Would that graph have been any different? Would we have been higher if you take the past few years economic, how can I call them? Not disasters, but issues we've had with our country. So would that not have made a minor difference as to where we might have been if everything wasn't as bad as it was? So it's just also something I'm wondering about the study. Was that taken into account compared to the other countries that's so high?
Yeah, I think, of course, the economic market and the things that happen in it have a major influence on affordability. But what the slide is showing us here is as vaping becomes more affordable, it will become more accessible, and as it becomes more accessible, that's where the takeoff point is, that J curve, right, where your market grows exponentially. So people that want to get in on the vaping market, people that are interested to jump in now, I don't think it's a bad time to jump in. Remember, our perception is that the market is saturated. That is my perception as well. People will tell you, oh, the juice market is so saturated, it's difficult to get a new juice line in. But clearly what we're seeing over here is there's still way more room for growth here. It just needs to be done correctly. If you do it correctly, if you put all your energy in it correctly, then you're still on the good side of from an investing point of view, of the J curve, right?
The other thing is that you have to differentiate between overall market potential growth and individual enterprise growth. They say that the market has grown 10.3% per annum. Has Vaping grown at 10.3% per annum? I would say Vaping has probably grown at 30% per annum. So now what's happening is, even though there's that growth potential, the bulk of that is going to be taken by the successful chains and the successful companies that expand much higher than the overall growth rate is. And that leaves, companies that don't really know their customers, that don't really have what the people want, that they don't have the right price point and so on. They're still going to be struggling. I mean, any business, regardless of growth potential, if you're not a good businessman, you're going to struggle. Whereas if you know what your customers want, you give them the products they want at the price they want, with the sort of delivery options and payment options that they want, you'll grow faster than the overall national, average annual growth is.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point there, Richard. Okay, so I'm going to go to the last slide that I wanted to chat about. And that is on page 19 over here. Now, this is, in my mind, this is a very well structured presentation, because you have your impact on the last slide. Okay, because that's how it works. That's how it works in sales. You need to, if you want to be a salesman, you need to be able to create a problem, right? And then once you've created a problem, you then, at the very last moment, you bring a solution, right? That's what a good salesman will do. They'll speak with you, talk about, find out where there's a gap, and then they'll expand on that gap create that problem, and then they'll give you a solution for that problem. That's how a sale really works. Now, this little slide, the last one, this is a power slide. It also tells me what is going to happen from a response point of view here. So in 2017, the vaping industry has created 4,319 jobs here in South Africa. If we consider the expected growth in the vaping market, the industry will then create, by 2027, it will then create expected to create 14,690 jobs. That's numbers. That's real numbers, and it speaks volumes. And especially in a market where, in the South African market or economy, where we've got 26.6% unemployment rate. If you take this to the parliament, it's going to speak with them, because this is a problem that we face here locally, as we've got a high unemployment rate, and this is a market that can help out there, and especially because of the specialist stores, and those specialist stores being SMEs, they're creating jobs, right? And I think it's an important part of this presentation. And especially, I didn't know that the numbers were that high. I didn't think that we had 4,000 people currently employed by vaping in South Africa. And, I didn't think that in 10 years' time from now, that will be 14,000. What did you guys find here?
It's interesting figures, but the thing is as well that I don't think they should just look at total jobs created. South Africa has an innovation problem at the moment. We used to have a lot of patent registrations every year. That has dropped off dramatically. As a nation, we're just not in the innovation sphere anymore. We're relying on China and the EU and the US and Australia to design and develop the stuff, and we just import it and sell it, which is fine. But vaping being such a new thing, it's an ideal opportunity for our industry, young designers and bright young minds to get in while vaping was still fresh, and to use that as innovation. I mean, if we just look at power alone, one of the big things holding vaping back, not just in South Africa, but throughout the whole of Africa, is this question of electricity at home, power, charging the batteries of your device. There's an urgent need to come up with some kind of vape that is less reliant on, an electrical wall socket to work, whether it uses solar power or what it uses. I mean, it may sound, far-fetched, but most inventions do when they come out. That's the whole point of an invention, is that it solves a problem that people thought previously was unsolvable. So vaping presents a tremendous opportunity for the country. I mean, even if you look at juice, PG, VG, material to make coils, different types of wicking, cotton wicking, power supplies, batteries for mods. Everything in vaping is crying out for a more efficient, more effective, a cheaper, a solution that's more in line with African conditions, African budgets. And vaping could be a very strong field of innovation for South Africa. So it's something that, I think should be mentioned to government as well, is that vaping alone could be responsible for quite a lot of patent applications being registered in South Africa. It could be a driver of innovation within the industry, and South Africa could become like a gateway to Africa and the sort of supplier of vaporizer products to Africa, because that is surely where, when they talk about vaping saving 1 billion lives over the next century, surely 400 to 500,000 of those lives are going to be in Africa, because that is where smoking is still growing. It's where the people are the least informed about the risks of smoking. It's where there's very high cancer risks and other diseases that are attributable to smoking. So it's the continent where the greatest gains are there to be had for public health. And it's just such an opportunity for South Africa to spearhead the African discovery and the African trajectory into harm reduction. And so I think it's something we must look beyond jobs, and we must look at the innovation angle as well.
Yeah, you know, and then this number here will actually go up. Excuse me. This number here, if you know, if we do look at it like that, this number here with 14,000, this will go up because you know, it will create companies that innovate, and then, you know, we'll have warehouses with people working in manufacturing these kind of products for us. So absolutely, Richard, good point.
And it drives exports as well. You know, if you think how many vapors are PG sensitive, they can't have PG. Now, you know, PG surely is not a very difficult thing to manufacture. Now, why can't our chemists and our clever, you know, industrial chemist bods come up with an alternative for PG? If we could then do that and patent that, we could then export that to the world. So you're driving exports as well. And people always say, oh, we can't do it and this and that. The world's most efficient solar panel was designed in South Africa. The guy's now moved his factory to Germany. But he designed an extremely efficient solar panel, which is now powering a lot of the EU. And it's a South African guy who's working out of the old Rand Afrikaans University. And he has now moved across to Germany. But it was a truly South African development. He worked with South African scientists. They improved the solar panels here, and then they took the manufacturing overseas. But I mean, if we can design a really efficient solar panel here, we can surely design, you know, alternatives for VG and PG, or alternatives to organic cotton, or, you know, other stuff that vaping needs. I mean, a battery or a mod that works off solar power to just to augment the lithium ion power that comes out of it, you know, would be a fantastic invention. If you only need to charge your device every second day instead of every day because it's supplemented by solar power or whatever. I mean, I don't know, but we do have the technical minds here to do it. It's a case that people must stop being so passive and sitting back and allowing innovators overseas to steal all the limelight, because when you take the innovation, you also take all the exports with you. I mean, China is killing everybody with vaping exports because they just manufacture it that much cheaper and faster and better than anybody else does. But that's a manufacturing issue. An innovation issue is something completely different. There's no reason why we can't do it here. We've got the science.
Cool. That pretty much wraps up all the slides that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, that also wraps up this section of the show. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Hope you guys got some value out of that. And please leave comments below. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions around this. But also wanted to just thank Canback Consulting and also Arshad Abbas for providing us with this information. I think this is going to, the whole response to Parliament to the bill that's out now for public response will be made visible by the VPA. So we'll get a lot of information in this next week, what really was the response, and on all the points in the bill. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.